welcome one and all to this year's Taylor Lecture. The Nathaniel W. Taylor Lectureship in Theology was created in 1902 by a gift from Rebecca Taylor Hatch of Brooklyn, New York, in memory of her father, who was Dwight Professor of Didactic Theology from 1822 to 1858. 1822, when Yale Divinity School was founded as a separate part of Yale. A series of lectures on some theme in theology is given every second year, alternating with the Schaeffer Lecture Series. This year's Taylor lecturer is Professor Michael Welker of Heidelberg. Could we turn those lights off, please? Someone hit the switch. And, yeah. Thank you. Professor Welker was educated in Germany and holds doctorates in theology and philosophy from Heidelberg and Tübingen, where he also completed his Habilitationsschrift. He has been a professor of systematic theology in Heidelberg since 1991, where he served as the director of the International Scientific Forum from 1996 to 2006. A prolific author of important theological monographs and essays that range widely across the field of systematic theology, his major publications include God's Spirit, Theology of the Holy Spirit, Church in Pluralism, Creation and Reality, the Warfield Lectures at Princeton, God's Universality and Relativity of the World, Theological Cosmology, in dialogue with the American Process Thinking of Whitehead. His interest in the intersection of theology and science is clear and abundant, and was particularly evident in work that he published with the eminent British theologian and scientist John Polkinghorne. This work includes a collection on the end of the world and the ends of God, Science and Theology on Eschatology. Professor Welker is no stranger to North America, having served as a visiting professor at McMaster University, at Princeton, and at Harvard. I had the good pleasure of visiting Professor Welker last year on his home turf in Heidelberg, and I'm very pleased to welcome him here to Yale today. The Taylor Lectures this year will deal with the theme, the Theology and Science Discourse on Anthropology, and today's lecture is, What Can Theology Contribute to the Theology and Science Discourse? Please join me in welcoming Professor Welker for today's Taylor Lecture.
Thank you very much for this most kind introduction, Dean Ettridge, Dean Towns, dear colleagues, alumni, students. I'm most grateful for your wonderful invitation to deliver the 2009 Taylor Lectures. My three contributions will deal with the theology and science discourse in the area of anthropology. More precisely, I should like to discuss 5 answers to the general question, what can theology contribute to the theology and science discourse, particularly focusing in the area of anthropology? The first 3 answers I will give today. Answers 4 and 5 in the following lectures. What can theology contribute to the theology and science discourse? At present, the demand for interdisciplinary collaboration in the academy is widespread. Interdisciplinary and possibly international cooperation generate respect and sometimes even high public esteem for the persons involved in it in universities, colleges, or research centers. And it certainly does not hurt. It does not hurt in application for research grants. Against the actual development of an increasing specialization in the sciences as well as in the humanities, we are now expected to change our course. For the truly important challenges in the natural, the human, and the life sciences are believed to require interdisciplinary networks and collaboration if they are to be dealt with successfully. In this general multidisciplinary enthusiasm in universities and institutions of research and higher learning, The dangers which accompany such euphoria are often overlooked. For it is only to a very small degree that serious interdisciplinary dialogues are just relaxed discussions between academically educated and open-minded individuals. Rather, as representatives of the disciplines, each of the potential partners in the dialogue is bound within a multifaceted interconnection and association of ideas and research. Each of them belongs to a network of established, recognized, and proven methods and practices which must not be ignored in academic contexts with other fields and disciplines. All too easily, the scholars engaged in these dialogues can fall into a situation characteristic of what we have termed the Frederick the Great syndrome. The Prussian King Frederick the Great loved composing music, and he loved composing poems. To be sure, he also loved to present his musical compositions and the result of his literary ambitions to groups of his subjects and admirers. In public, the composers would praise his poems, whereas the poets would praise his musical skills. Similarly, today, academics who achieve something important in their own discipline are easily given an exaggerated applause in other disciplines, and that can even happen when something only semi-rational was produced. For instance, the golden words of scientific Nobel Prize laureates on God and the Word are admiringly repeated in unsuitable contexts. Sometimes the suspicion comes up that academics in interdisciplinary programs to disguise Sometimes the suspicion comes up that academics use interdisciplinary programs to disguise their inability to achieve good, solid results in their own fields. Responsible doctoral supervisors are aware of the danger that students who occupy themselves with too many disciplines at early stages easily develop into popular philosophers who lack both a true academic home and a trustworthy academic competence. It is with this background of experience in mind that I turn to the discussion of the first answer to the question, what can theology contribute to the theology and science discourse? The first answer was, theology and science should search for common meta-theoretical presuppositions of their dialogue. Theology and science should search for common meta-theoretical presuppositions of their dialogue. This answer dominated the international discussion in the 70s and early 80s of the 20th century. The second today the literature speaks of this period as the method phase of the dialogue. And in my answers 2 and 3, I will refer back to the so-called physics phase of the dialogue in the later 80s and in the 90s, and in the last 2 I will refer to the so-called biology and theology phase of the dialogue. So in this method phase, experiments with philosophical theories, Aristotle, Cusanus, Spinoza, Peirce, Whitehead, also semi-philosophical theories like those of Thomas Aquinas and Teilhard de Chardin were pondered as providing bridge theories for the dialogue. The representatives of this interdisciplinary discourse asked themselves whether they should work with metaphysics, with transcendental theories, with phenomenology or systems theory, or. Popular philosophical hybrids between these approaches were also discussed. Combinations of the philosophical theories. Typologies of models of the dialogue were proposed. You can still find them in textbooks which serve as introduction into the science and theology discourse. Conflict model, independence model, dialogue model, integration model, complementarity model, and so on. The problem with these actually popular philosophical discourses was that they neither seriously touched theological nor scientific grounds. They were in the air, so to speak. As a rule, these discourses fled into so-called big questions in science and religion. And they mostly offered vague or predictable answers. I give you only 3 examples. How did the universe begin? How will the universe end? Standard comment. We have cosmological and religious answers, and both show deficits. Or what is the nature of space and time? Standard comments on this level. We have answers from transcendental philosophy and naturalistic answers. The thoughts of religion are attractive if they reflect on eternity, not just in opposition to time, but as compatible with it. Or is science the only path to truth? Has science made belief in God obsolete? Predictable answers only in specific and problematic perspectives can sciences claim the monopoly of truth issues and propagate atheism and agnosticism, and so on. I do not maintain that the meta-theoretical discourses and the fixation on the so-called big questions with the help of popular philosophy means are worthless. I don't say this. In several contexts, they can serve, so to speak, as warm-up rituals. But they do not really promote the dialogue and do not lead to serious progress in insight. The meta-theoretical orientation is primarily interested in the dialogue as such. Beckett is said to have asked the, I think, brilliant question, are you merely interested in everything or also in something specific? The meta-theoretical discourses have the tendency that they are merely interested in everything. In contrast, the most fruitful dialogues of the past 20, 25 years concentrated on specific topics. Topicality is crucial, was one of the guiding rules in the fruitful dialogues in which I had the joy to participate. In topical concentration, the disciplines tried to enrich and challenge each other. At this point, we have reached the second answer to the question, what can theology contribute to the science and theological discourse, if not just working on meta-theoretical levels? And this second answer of mine is, in the discourse with the sciences, theology should present and unfold central theological themes to prevent the sciences from developing false perceptions of theology, as has been the case very often in the past. To discuss this answer, I should like to turn to the topic creation, as, I think, a good example of such a central theological topic. The option is widely held that the classic biblical creation accounts, especially that of Genesis 1, the so-called priestly writing, demonstrate the total incompatibility of theological and scientific thinking. According to this view, persons who enter the theology and science dialogue have to renounce the biblical classical texts with respect to the topic creation, whereas those who endorse these texts settle with a worldview which is not able to connect to scientific thought at all. There are 2 main reasons for this bleak constellation. First, the Bible talks about creation in 7 days. Contemporary scientific insight sees a cosmic development of 13.73 billion years with an uncertainty of about 120 million years. Sorry. Second, the Bible says that God created the world through the power of His Word. Science sees the universe and our world as a result of evolution. Evolution, however, is regarded by many as the most efficient engine of atheism ever discovered by humans, and here I quote the famous Oxford Handbook of Religion and Science, 2006. I continue the quotation. Creationists and believers in almost any religion are right that evolutionary biology should be feared and rejected. It is the great engine of atheism. End of quote. In addition to being incompatible with basic scientific insights in these two respects, the biblical view of creation seems to be burdened with fundamental religious and ethical problems, which threaten its very credibility. Based on Genesis 1, God the Creator has been regarded as the cause of everything, as the all-determining reality, to quote Bultmann-Pannenberg, as the ultimate point of reference, Gordon Kaufman, as the omnipotent ground of being, and so on, you know it. This understanding, which can be termed as abstract or metaphysical theism, leads to the agonizing theodicy question. That is, how can a not only all-powerful, but also all-loving God create a world full of suffering, evil, and death? With God seen as determining everything, there is no answer to this question. You have to be sober. Yeah? If you embrace abstract theism, the theodicy question comes as your backpack, and you have no possibility to get rid of it. Finally, the creation account of Genesis 1 seems to support an anthropocentric ecological brutalism, which the infamous call to dominion, which clearly speaks the language of conquerors and slaveholders. Fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the earth and many fellow creatures. Genesis 1:28. All these observations, easily lead to the conclusion the biblical creation account, with its ideas of creation in 6 or 7 days, belongs to an ancient religious world. We definitely know that the processes listed in Genesis 1 did not happen in 1 week. Even if God had been at work day and night, the world was not created in 6 times 24 hours. Yet, is this what the first chapter of the Bible actually says? Genesis 1 presents a much more differentiated perception of reality than grasped by those who see this creation account as the expression of a naive and outdated worldview. To emphasize this point, we need to concern ourselves with one of the apparent inconsistencies or even contradictions of the text. First, the double creation of light. On the one hand, Genesis 1:3-5 states, "Then God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness God called night, and there was evening, and there was morning, the first day." On the other hand, 9 verses later, Genesis 1:14-19, describes the creation of celestial bodies that are to separate day and night. And God said, "Let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years." If we approach these statements without sensitivity to this text's particular perception of reality, it seems to be propounding contradictory nonsense. How could God create light without creating the sun, moon, and stars? Why is the separation of day from night carried out twice? Is this separation carried out directly by God, or are sun, moon, and stars to separate day from night? Such questions, which with apparent cleverness hold themselves aloof from this supposedly naive text that cannot clearly work out its ideas, do not perceive the differentiated view of reality that is being developed here. Referring to the work of Benno Jakob, Klaus Westermann, and other Jewish and Christian colleagues, the Zurich Old Testament scholar Odil Hannes Steck has shown that 2 perspectives on reality and 2 time systems must be distinguished here. God thus creates brightness, transparency, and light from the very beginning. In the divine activity of creating, God acts in this brightness. The light of God, the light in which God creates, rests, and is alive and effective, is not simply identical with the light in which human beings and other creatures live. They stand, though, in analogy to each other. This analogical relation is what makes it possible at all for there to be knowledge of God and of creation under the conditions of earthly existence. Likewise, the separation of light from darkness carried out by God in the first work of creation is far from simply being identical with the separation of day from night by means of the stars. Yet there are analogies between God's days and the days of the creatures. God's time, one time system, and the time of human beings and the times, the rhythms of actions or of life of the other creatures, another time system, stand in analogy to each other. They can be correlated and coordinated with each other in differentiated gradation. The priestly account thinks in two time systems. To be sure, it does not have the exact cosmological knowledge of the 20th century that the universe is 13.7 billion years old. The largest number the biblical authors were able to imagine was probably the 10,000 times 10,000, a number used for the angels in God's service as mentioned in Daniel 7. But the biblical authors do know that the days of the Lord are immense in spans of time. Immense spans of time. For 1,000 years endure in God's sight are like yesterday when it is past, or like a watch in the night. Psalm 19. Quite adequately, the priestly creation account depicts in these long spans of time for each day of the Lord a sequence of first cosmological, then biological, then cultural, and finally religious processes at work in the great architecture of creation. An insight that is valid also in today's scientific perspective. Yeah, so science often tells us, well, they have been pretty clever already in seeing this. First cosmological, then biological, then cultural, then religious processes interwoven, and only this big arrangement makes creation. Once we have recognized this, we can understand why the priestly writing chooses to present its account of creation in a form in which God creates over the course of several days of the Lord. The creation account of Genesis 1 describes the differentiated structural pattern of realities and life processes that we today divide between the separate categories of processes that are to be described in physical terms, physics, processes that are to be described in biological terms, processes that are mental and cultural, and finally religious processes. God's creative action connects these very different domains of life and action. In the process of creation, complex interdependencies are produced between very diverse domains of life. It is only by being interwoven with each other that the domains of life become creation in the strict sense. In this complex reality, the biblical text emphasizes God's reactive experiencing and acting as God reacts to the presence of that which is created. They describe God's intervening in that which is already created, intervening for the purposes of further specification. 7 times the priestly account emphasizes God's evaluative perspective, and God saw that what had been created was good. 3 times Genesis 1 emphasizes God's activity of naming. Twice God intervenes in that which is already created in order to separate it. God saw, God evaluated, God named, God separated. According to the classical creation texts, all these activities and reactivities are part of the complex event creation. All these reactive activities which relate to that which is already produced are requisite in order to bring the process of the creation of heaven and earth to a close. Yet not only has the reactivity of the creating God to be acknowledged, but also the creature's own activity. The creature's own activity is not only a consequence and a result of a creation that is already completed. Rather, it is embedded in the process of creation and participates in that process. The priestly creation account describes the whole creation, not only and not firstly human beings, as itself active, separating, ruling and imparting rhythm, as itself producing and giving life. Creation and evolution are not incompatible. Creation and evolution are not incompatible, according to the Bible. Well, if you look at all sorts of fundamentalist ideologies, you can say whatever you want. But indeed, the biblical view of creation cannot abstract from the evolutionary activity. It is most important to notice that the participatory activity of that which is creaturely does not find expression only with regard to the human being. It certainly does not find expression only within the mandate of dominion, which has been the subject of so much discussion. Anxiety about the creature's own power being too great is apparently foreign to the classical creation texts of the biblical traditions. Anxiety about the creature's own power being too great tends to entrench itself behind the theistic model of absolute causation and dependence. Instead of that anxiety, we encounter in the classical creation text a rich description of that which is creaturely engaged in the activity of separating, ruling, producing, developing, and reproducing itself. Abstract theism, thought about God as the ground or even cause of everything, has indeed to be qualified in the light of the biblical creation accounts. The classical talk about God's omnipotence cannot be sustained by the mechanistic use of the omniquantum, God producing everything. It requires a theologically informed qualification. A first step towards this end is an important structural insight. Most religious and metaphysical thinking regards God and man, God and the world, creator and creation, in one-to-one figures of thought. It's God and the world, God and the human. In this figure, any co-creativity threatens the power of the divine. Yeah? If you have God and the other is giving power, well, where's the divine? The priestly creation account, however, thinks in one-to-many structures, one and many. God relates creatively to different co-creative creatures and to different creaturely realms of powerful and even evolutionary activity. It is quite remarkable how the biblical creation account seems interested in a compatibility of its insights with general observations in the course of natural history. In contrast to other ancient Oriental creation accounts, a secularization sets in, which eliminates any deification of sun, moon, and stars of the heavens and the earth. No gods, just creatures. These insights, however, lead to further burning questions. Does the co-creativity of the creatures not bring potentials of self-endangerment and even self-jeopardy into creation? And if so, does this not question the goodness of creation, of which Genesis 1 repeatedly speaks? The answer is that the biblical creation account does not look at a dream world, but at the real world, in which life indispensably lives at the cost of other lives. The real world, in which life lives at the expense of other life. This becomes clear when one focuses on the so-called call to dominion, Genesis 1, 26, 28, 29. The regulation of potential conflicts between human beings and animals. The commentaries on Genesis 1 inform us that both verbs used here, radach, trample under, and kabash, subjugate, belong in the context of violence, subjugation, and domination. Both words for domination are otherwise applied to slaves and to a conquered land in the framework of thought of these biblical traditions. How is this compatible with human beings' ordination to be imago Dei, the image of God? What light do these human beings reflect back upon the God whose likeness they are? Genesis 1:30, a verse that normally receives little attention in the context of the questions we are posing, offers a key that is at first glance wholly unremarkable. Both human beings and animals are to take their nourishment from the plants that sprout on the surface of the whole earth. Human beings and animals thus have a common realm of life and nourishment. One can already envision problems, tensions, colliding interests. How will conflicts of interest between human beings and animals be regulated? How should human beings behave when animals, in the latter's interest of nourishment, drive the former away from the plants yielding seeds? How should animals behave toward human beings when human beings use the plants yielding seed for their own nourishment? It is at this point that the situation necessitates the so-called mandate of dominion. The mandate of dominion serves to impart a differentiated order to the world of nourishment shared by human beings and animals. This order is established through a hierarchy of powers. On the one hand, human beings and animals are neighbors and live together in a common sphere. On the other hand, it is clear and unequivocal that animals are living beings of secondary order and subordinate to humankind. There is no question of allowing one's neighbor to starve in favor of one's house pet. Human beings have primacy over animals. Just as the admittedly lesser rights of slaves are secured in the Old Testament bodies of law, from a thought that is foreign to us today, or we want it to be foreign to us, but they think in these two class systems, of course, and they are slaveholder society like all ancient societies are. But on the other hand, they try to secure the rights. So the big difference between Israel and other slaveholder societies is that the slaves are not speaking tools, but they are potentially free human beings to be released after 7 years, and so their rights have to be secured. We do not like this two-class system and so on, but it shows a differentiated mode of thinking that you also find in relation with the human beings and the animals here. The relation of human beings to animals is a relation of tolerance and of preservation in human beings' own interest. This is what the tension between causa dominium and imago Dei says. On the one hand, human beings are given primacy. On the other hand, please reflect the image of God to the rest of creation. And this means the mandate of dominion provides an unquestionable one-sided and hierarchical relation between humans and animals. We should not cultivate romantic images about this relation. At the same time, this unquestionably hierarchical relation must not be a relation involving brutal or indifferent extermination. Instead, it is positively determined in a twofold manner. First, it is God's will that human beings stand in a community of solidarity with animals. Second, as God's image, human beings stand in a special relation over against animals. They are made royal deputies of God the Creator. As such royal deputies, they have to exercise justice and mercy among their fellow creatures. They thus are to extend God's righteousness and care in spite of their designed domination over other creatures. The fact that they are supposed to have dominion over the animals thus also means, definitely based on royal ideologies of the ancient Near East, that they must exercise responsibility towards animals. As rulers over animals, human beings must grant animals a relative level of rights. In the face of rival demands and interests, human beings have the function of serving as judges. The call to dominion signals both conflicts and tensions in creation and a divine care that involves the creativity of human beings. If, however, creation includes potentially severe conflicts, fight, life and death, between the creatures, and a dependence on human responsibility and leadership to solve these conflicts, how can creation be repeatedly called good, even very good, especially when, as we all know, human responsibility is all too often lacking, and humans are clueless or even brutal? The answer is good, tov, means in Hebrew life-furthering. It is not to be confused with glorious. Creation is not paradise. For those, however, who attempt to grasp creation only with regard to an initial event in cosmic history, or who strive to conceive creation with the help of only a reconstruction of natural history, access to the theological and substantive meaning of this process is closed. The nature of God is not grasped with the idea of an omnipotent entity which generates and absolutely controls the cosmic evolution, or of a power which merely sustains what has been created. To grasp the nature of God, one rather has to consider the interconnection of sustenance of this creation and of rescue and ennoblement of creation, a topic that will be of great interest in our last lecture. In theological terms, a creativity has to be taken into account which connects the sustenance of the world with the areas of soteriology and eschatology in order to understand what creation is all about. The constructive unfolding of central theological topics which speak of potential common areas of research is crucial for the dialogue with the sciences. But theology should also, and this is my third answer, correct mistakes in the external perception by scientists. So I come to the third answer to the question, what should theology contribute to the science and theology discourse? And in the dialogue, theology should correct mistakes and inconsistencies in scientific presentations of theological and religious issues. And the example I would like to take here is the great Stephen Hawking. The reconstruction and dating of physical, chemical, and biological processes in natural space-time, based on empirical measurements and extrapolations by mathematized theories, this is what the scientific account has to offer on creation. The capability of a more and more exact description of the sequences in this process, the more and more exact dating of its stages, the exploration of the interconnectedness of diverse processes in the evolution towards higher form of life. All this is most impressive. It can fill the listener with a secular awe and admiration. But does it open any perspective on theological issues? Time and again, scientists have claimed exactly this, that their research opens a perspective on theological issues of creation. And if they claim it, we should listen. But we should not just listen with awe and admiration, but also with a sharp view whether this is valid, also theologically valid. A noteworthy example among the very famous scientific authors is the cosmologist and Cambridge professor Stephen Hawking. I know that Richard Dawkins rose much more media resonance, but this was just, to put it shortly, naturalistic and scientific fundamentalism. So this is not, it's shrill, but it's not very insightful. It tries to make us look bad and picks up all nasty passages from the biblical traditions. And of course, we have to think about all this. And but it's not a dialogue really. It's not and it's just get out of my way rhetoric. But Stephen Hawking is much more subtle. His book, A Brief History of Time from the Big Bang to Black Holes, has become an international bestseller and was the book in the second phase, the physics phase of the science and theology dialogue. One of the reasons for the book's broad impact probably lies in the points made throughout the book about the theology of creation and about God. The introduction to this book was written by Carl Sagan. At its end, Sagan one-sidedly highlights Hawking's stance toward religion and his theological thought about creation. He writes, "This is also a book about God, or perhaps about the absence of God. The word God fills these pages. Hawking embarks on a quest towards Einstein's famous question about whether God has any choice in creating the universe. Hawking is attempting, as he explicitly states, to understand the mind of God. And this makes all the more unexpected the conclusion of the effort, at least so far. A universe with no edge in space, no beginning or end in time, and nothing for a creator to do." End of quote. This introduction appeals to an agnostic mood among leading intellectuals of our time, a mood that is critical of religion. We all know this. But Hawking's own reflections on God and the world are much more complicated and subtle. But they are also, I have to say, quite confused. To be sure, skeptical perspectives on God as creator of the universe are present at least throughout the first and last thirds of the book. Yet, they appear in three different forms. Only one partially matches Carl Sagan's statement that the book's conclusion leaves us with the universe with nothing for a creator to do. Only one of three versions. At any rate, Sagan himself qualifies his claim by saying that this is the conclusion, at least so far. He also characterizes the book as a book about God, or perhaps about the absence of God. Here you see, honesty, attempt in this rhetoric. What in Hawking's position permits such a vacillating summation? In their first form, the critical reflections on Hawking's part, which we can summarize as a reflection on creation in the broadest sense, they pick up on a discovery made by Edwin Hubble in 1929. Hubble's discovery that the distant galaxies are moving away from us made it possible to entertain the hypothesis, I quote Hawking, that there was a time about 10 or 20,000 million years ago when they were all at exactly the same place. This discovery suggested that there was a time called the Big Bang, when the universe was infinitesimally small and infinitely dense. From this discovery of galaxies continually moving further away from each other, and from the connected hypotheses that there was once a Big Bang, Hawking draws two conclusions. First, this discovery finally brought the question of the beginning of the universe into the realm of science. Note, question of the beginning of the universe brought into the realm of science after 1929. Second, an expanding universe does not preclude a creator, but it does place limits on when he might have carried out his job. Big Bang. On the one hand, Hawking leaves room for a God of the first moment, while on the other hand, later in the text, his thought moves in another direction, away from the hot Big Bang model. He then strives for a theory that is supposed to replace the conception of the hot Big Bang and to render superfluous the problem of the first moment. This second form of Hawking's reflection aims at a unified theory that connects quantum mechanics and the general theory of relativity. This theory could describe finite four-dimensional space-time as, I quote him, completely self-contained, with no singularities or boundaries, such as a hot Big Bang. The university is in a constant flux of expansion and contradiction, no first second needed. Well, two comments. In March 2003, in a famous lecture at the Texan A&M University on Gödel and the end of physics, Hawking corrected this view, saying that such a final unified theory will never exist. Yeah? This lecture never made it into the media like this. In his book, he gives another nice story. He said, I was working on this theory, and I visited the Pope in the Vatican. And the Pope said to us, we could examine everything, but not the Big Bang. This was God's time. And Hawking continues and says, I was so happy that he didn't know the direction of my thoughts, getting rid of the Big Bang, because I did not want to suffer the Galilee problem. Nice media rhetoric. First, Pius XII, in a controversial statement in the 50s, once mentioned this, leave the Big Bang for theology. John Paul II always warned against doing this. Yeah? And Hawking was repeatedly in Castel Gandolfo, also after this communication. So obviously he had no fear that he might get into trouble. So it was sheer media rhetoric. So this is a problem we are fighting also in the theology and science dialogue, yeah, that there is a lot of appeal, media-steered appeal to common negative preoccupations and vague images of what theology is all about, and that even some of the brightest scientists make use of it. And I have these informations from friends who work in the Vatican Observatory Research Group in Tucson, Arizona. The Vatican has a research group of Jesuits who are also well-trained physicists, so that the case Galileo will never happen again. So they knew really what Hawking had said in these communication, and that these nice remarks in this book were kind of promotions. Maybe even the editor said, couldn't you give us a little bit on that? The second idea, which is no longer pursued by Hawking, but in these days, no beginning of the universe. And now listen to what Hawking comments on this. The comments are ambivalent. On the one hand, he asks, what place then for a creator? What Sagan picks up and feeds the agnostic mood. On the other hand, he concludes his book not only with the hope that such a theory of the type described will be discovered and will achieve plausibility and broad currency within the general culture, he connects with this hope the certainty that this would be the ultimate triumph of human reason, for then we would know the mind of God. We would know the mind of God. So cosmology and religious piety obviously fuse here. In this second form of Hawking's creation theory, it seems as if now the first moment is to be taken away from God, as if God were to disappear once an absolute beginning of the universe is excluded. On the other hand, that which is supposed to become clear in the unified theory is described in religious forms. We would know the mind of God. It thus remains undecided what religious consequences would follow in such a theory. Could it be developed? We don't know. In Hawking's perspective, it will not be developed. Do we have to conclude then God would have created the only universe that mathematics permitted him to create? I quote Nancy Murphy. He would then be beaten by mathematics? Or would cosmological knowledge and religion merge? We would know the mind of God. Hawking himself, though, suggests in his book that even this cognitive triumph, which would signify insight into the mind of God could quickly go stale. Even this insight would still be highly deficient. He writes, even if there is only one possible unified theory, it is just a set of rules and equations. In a question often quoted since, he asks, what is it that breathes fire into the equations and makes a universe from them to describe? One of the sentences which I can throw in a little as fiery as the many sentences in the lecture yesterday. What is it that breathes fire into the equations and makes a universe for them to describe? However, the open questions concerning the creation and the preservation of the world go far beyond this problem of the difference between theory and reality, between knowledge and actualization. Hawking renders problematic his own second form of cosmological thought by raising several irregular reflections and considerations. He writes that science's usual approach of constructing a mathematical model cannot answer the question of why there should be a universe for the model to describe. Why does the universe go all the bother of existing, he writes? Is the unified theory so compelling that it brings about its own existence, or does it need a creator? And if so, does he have any other effect on the universe? You see now, very naive religious questions. Quite obviously, a bright cosmologist is getting slightly confused with respect to metaphysical and theological issues. At this point, where there is currently no prospect of an adequate accord between theory and realization, Hawking begins to consider that there might be limits to forming theories and conceiving reality in mathematical terms only. In doing so, he moves toward a fruitful form of thinking of creation, I think. How can we develop theories of the world that stimulate the theoretical conceptions of cosmological, biological, cultural, and religious reality, particular to each specific discipline, both to engage in syntheses and to allow their difference to emerge clearly? How can we develop a polyphony of approaches which do not fuse all these, allow the differences, and yet allow for cooperation? On this level, we rise to the challenges connected with the answers 4 and 5. So tomorrow I would like to talk about the dialogue between theology and science. It should develop multi-perspectival explorations of areas of knowledge common to both of them, and I will focus on anthropology, flesh, body, heart, soul, spirit, exploring the depth of the human person. It will be a bottom-up approach. And in my final lecture, I will talk about the discourse should try to build small bridges at the boundaries of each side's area of knowledge. And I will speak about the human being in her relation to the sustaining, saving, and ennobling God, and will speak about spiritual realism in the theology and science discourse. Thank you very much.